Are disappointing books always bad? Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my first top 10 list of the end of the year. Lots of people are doing, end of the year bookish type stuff, and soon I'll have out, in January I should say, I'll have out my top 10 fiction and nonfiction list this year. But this year I have to tell you that I read a number of books that I found disappointing, so I thought I would try to create a new tradition and do the top 10 most disappointing books of the year. So these are the 10 books that I read that I just didn't enjoy. I thought there was something about them that was missing, something that could have been better perhaps. And they're not necessarily bad books. I'll tell you that right up front. Some of these books are not bad. As a matter of fact, some of these books are good, but they disappointed me sometimes for reasons that have to do with my own personality, my own reading taste. So I just thought I would share these with you. I think I've reviewed all 10 of these books on my channel, and you could probably find those reviews. I think almost all of them are mixed in with other book reviews as well. You can find all those on my channel if you want to. So this will hopefully just be kind of a brief overview of what I found disappointing about the book. By the way, they're listed in the order of least disappointing to most disappointing, which is going to be controversial with the very first book. So number 10 on my list of most disappointing books of and I should say reads of 2024, not books of 2024. Most disappointing books I read in 2024 is Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I buddy read this with my friend Mark Nash, who felt like he needed to read it for purposes of his own, and I agreed to read it with him because I'd read Normal People. And, I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was great. I thought I saw what Rooney was trying to do, and I thought, I should give Sally Rooney the chance. This was her first novel. And so we read it, and I have to tell you that I really didn't like this book at all. I liked Normal People a little bit. I thought it was okay. I thought this book was actually kind of bad. And I don't think it's just that, generationally speaking, I didn't understand the characters or the motivations. I don't think the characters were particularly consistent. I don't think the characters were particularly consistent even in the way they were presented on the page. I don't just mean the way they acted towards one another, but the way they were presented on the page. I thought the situations they found themselves in, the situations they were in, seemed stretched for effect. And then, kind of worst of all, I didn't like any of the characters, and I think Rooney intended for us to like at least one of the characters in the book, or maybe two of the characters. I didn't like either one of them. I wouldn't want to be friends with either of them or have a conversation, more than one conversation with either of them. So to me, this was actually not a good book, but it's on my list at number 10, with one being the most disappointing, because I didn't really have very high expectations, which should kind of clue you in about the way the rest of this list is probably going to go. At number 9, I have Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan. This book, I believe, won the Women's Prize for fiction this year. I know it was nominated, and I know a lot of people liked it, and I didn't dislike it. This book is on the list, and the reason why it's number 9 is I didn't like it as much as I wanted to like it. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but it's a kind of book that, I think I should like. It's, a book about a conflict I know very little about. It's a book about a part of the world I know very little about. The book is told in, I think, oftentimes quite beautiful language. It's quite sumptuous in some of its descriptions, and it can be quite moving, but it never really fully connected with me. I went back and watched my review, and one of the things I said in the review was that I was less interested in the characters than I was in the history the book was telling. Now, it's a work of fiction, so, it really isn't a work of history, but that's kind of what I wanted it to be. And I found myself reading through the sections about, characters falling in love or developing relationships between characters, and not being particularly interested, and just wanting to get on to the next thing, wanting to know kind of what happened, not just to the characters, but what happened in general. And so, I put it on this list as being disappointing. Number 8 may be the most controversial book I have on the list, and that's Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This won the Booker Prize last year, I believe, or the Women's Prize. I can't remember which. I think it was the Booker Prize. Maybe it was 2 years ago. Anyway, I'm a little behind on getting to Demon Copperhead, and I went back again. I watched my review of Demon Copperhead, and I think my opinion is the same now as it was then. It starts off really strong. It creates a really great character, a sense of the danger this character is in, the family this character has, you know, how he goes in search at a very young age of a place to be, and family and character and all kinds of, you know, horrific stuff that happens to him. It is a David Copperfield resetting set in Appalachia, particularly Western Virginia, not West Virginia, but I believe Western Virginia. And it depicts really well, I think, society, culture, and the poverty and the kind of crushing circumstances under which people there live. And it really goes a lot into drug addiction, particularly over-the-counter opioid-type drug addiction. And it does a great job with that up to a point. But at some point, the book became kind of, I thought, cliched when it's talking about high school football stars and the way they're treated and how that's worked in. And then at some points, I thought the book became really specific and preachy about the way in which these opioids had been introduced to, you know, Appalachia and the rest of American society by drug companies, almost intentionally to addict people to them. And I thought it became a little bit preachy, a little bit teachy, and, you know, not as good. And then in addition to that, the further on the book you went, the more I remembered the things from David Copperfield, and so I knew what was going to happen. You know, I didn't know exactly, you know, the circumstances she would describe, but I knew what the big plot points were going to be because I'd read David Copperfield. Anyway, so, you know, Demon Copperhead is on my list here. Disappointing books at number 8. At number 7, I have The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. I read this for the BookTube Prize this year. It was one of my 6 books in my group, and it's the first Lauren Groff book that I read. And it's basically set in colonial Virginia. Where we meet and are introduced to a young servant girl who is living through starvation times at the Jamestown colony, and she decides to escape to avoid being killed and cannibalized. And she escapes out into the wilderness, and she, you know, has to deal with all kinds of things like how does she move from one place to another? How does she escape? Someone's chasing her. She has to escape from him. She has to find food, and she connects with, at various points, indigenous people living in the region as she makes her way north, further and further north towards Canada, I believe. And I won't give away the end of the story, but one of the things I found disappointing about the book was that it seems like it's set in under realistic circumstances, but improbable things happen quite frequently that allow this girl, this maybe mid-teens girl, to survive and escape. I thought it presented indigenous societies in a stereotypical positive way without dealing with, you know, the full reality perhaps of indigenous societies, which, you know, no society is always perfect or always, you know, without flaws and problems. And, you know, I thought it became kind of preachy about the environment, about the way in which Western civilization uses resources in the environment without any kind of thought about what's going to happen after that. Anyway, I thought it became a bit preachy. Now, I don't know if you picked up on something here, but to me, books that become a bit preachy become problems. At number 6 on the list is a book which I read and hoped I would really like, and that's Kairos by Jenny Erpenbeck. I believe this won the International Booker Award this year. I've read 2 of the books by Jenny Erpenbeck, and I liked both of them. I liked both of them much more than I liked Kairos. Kairos is set in East Germany right around the time of the right in the decade or so before the collapse of the Soviet Union and the unification of East and West Germany, right before the wall came down, and in the period after that. And what it shows is, what it mainly concerns itself with, is a relationship between an older man and a teenage girl. This man is in his late 40s, I think, when he begins his affair with this teenage girl who their affair begins, I think, when she's around the age of 19. I said in my original review that one of the things that disturbed me about this is that he remembered her as a child because the reason he met her, knew it at all, was because he was a friend of the family. That seems really creepy to me and bothersome. And then there were elements of this relationship which were abusive elements. Now, a lot of that, or some of that, I think, is necessary to the point that Erpenbeck's trying to make. She's talking about, and a lot of what the book revolves around is kind of nostalgia for what was lost when East Germany joined West Germany. And you know, one of the things I thought was best then about the book was kind of that point. You know, we didn't think about it here in the West. We assumed that East Germans would love to live in West German society and all the things that all those things the Western world had access to. And that's true, but that doesn't mean they didn't miss things that they had before. Things like guaranteed employment, things like products that were really cheap. They may not be plentiful, and they may not be a wide variety. They didn't cost a lot of money, and those kind of changes are kind of talked about here. And as we go through this relationship, we see the young woman become this teenage girl become a young woman with opinions and ideas of her own, and you know, relationships not involving this man, which he's very jealous of, and she feels kind of stuck in this relationship, and that relationship is, I think, at the very least, borderline abusive, if not abusive. And we learn things about this man, which tie him more to East Germany's past, and the young woman, I think, clearly to trying to break away from that and break away from him to Germany's future. All that sounds good. Except that nostalgia thing doesn't really work very well if you aren't aware, if you don't know what the things Erpenbeck's describing that existed in East Germany were like. She can describe them all she wants to, but if you don't know them, particularly if you grew up in the West, that doesn't work as well. That relationship really bothered me. This is, you know, one of the things you'll know about me if you watch my channel often. These kind of predatory relationships of older men preying on very young, even if they're of the age of consent, girls, bothers me. And even though I believe this is being used as a metaphor that Erpenbeck is playing out in the book, it feels very real and in that way disturbing. That doesn't make it a bad book. I don't think it's a bad book. I was just disappointed because I thought I would like it more. Number 5 on my list is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. I feel like I'm picking all the winners of prizes here. Maybe there's a theme there in my video, but Orbital just won the Booker Prize, and I couldn't be more disappointed in that win because I wanted James to win. I want James by Percival Everett to win everything. And I thought of all the books in the Booker shortlist that had a chance to win, Orbital's probably my least favorite of the ones that I'd read, and then it won. So Orbital involves a group of, I believe, 6 people living on the International Space Station as it orbits the Earth. And essentially, it takes place in one day, one Earth day, but the space station makes, several orbits of the Earth during that one day. And we kind of get to know the characters, even though not very much. And I think that's because they're just supposed to be a stand-in for different types of people, and these people miss things about Earth. They miss family members, being in space. They contemplate the smallness of human life and the impact of what we're doing to the environment. And to make a long story short, it is a short book which covers themes that I don't think are particularly profound, nor do I think those are themes that are original, and it felt relatively cliched to me in all kinds of ways. And so that book was really disappointing, and it's a book I can say that I actually didn't like very much. Number 4 on my list is The New Life by Tom Crewe. This is a book which involves, is a work of historical fiction, involves 2 real people who work together to create a book in which they essentially were arguing that homosexuality is natural, that this is something that they were trying to prove in this book. And in the process, or during the time period in which the book is being written, Oscar Wilde is sent to prison for homosexuality, and that throws their plans to publish this book into all kinds of chaos, and they have to find a less reputable publisher. And then there are issues with these 2 men who, one of whom is definitely homosexual, the other one who is married to a homosexual woman, a lesbian, and their relationship, and how complicated all that is, and how all that plays out, and then their kind of relationship with one another, and how all that kind of stuff plays out. And I just wanted more from the book. I just didn't think it pulled off anything that you couldn't find in other books. It's not that the writing wasn't beautiful. It's not that the creation of place wasn't well done. I thought that was all really well done. I just didn't think there was a very big payoff in the book. I didn't think there was a lot of moments in which I thought, okay, I feel the humanity of these characters and their situation, and this feels new, and this is not something that I could have read in Morris or other books set in the same time period. And so I just found it disappointing because I didn't think it delivered what it promised at the beginning. Number 3 on my list is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, which, you know, the inclusion of this book and a Sally Rooney book may lead you to believe that I'm too old to appreciate these books, and that's possible. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow deals with the friendship between two young people from California who meet under kind of really weird circumstances, and they both have this love for video games. They go to college in Massachusetts. I can't remember if it's MIT or Harvard. They go to college in Massachusetts, find out that they're both there, and they renew their friendship, and they begin to work together as video game developers. And they have some real success. Now, the young man is in love with the young woman. The young woman is involved in an incredibly abusive relationship with a professor. This feels, you know, really cliched, and I think in my original review I said what disturbs me about it is that apparently maybe these things happen more often than I think, or that young women get involved in abusive relationships with older men. I'll refer you back to Kairos in this case. A third member of this kind of friendship comes along, a wealthy young man who I can't remember his name, I'm sorry to say, wealthy young man who the young man video game developer knows, becomes their business partner and helps them develop their business and get their video games out there, and all kinds of stresses come up in their relationship. The nature of the relationship of the two young men and the woman, to their friendship to one another, to all kinds of various things having to do with their success and who gets credit. And it was just one of those books in which I thought, and I said this in my original review, if these characters had just taken the time to talk to one another and explain to one another how they felt and what they were feeling, almost all the problems of the book could have been resolved. And that I found to be incredibly frustrating. I think the book ends better than it goes along near the end. There's a tragedy I won't give away that's involved, which, you know, if you couldn't see that coming a mile away, you might need a little bit more reading experience so that happens to you, or maybe you don't want that reading experience. But I just really didn't think the book delivered on all the hype that I'd heard around it and how many people liked it. For me, it just wasn't that great. Number 2 on my list is Northwoods by Daniel Mason. This is kind of a booktube darling. Lots of people read this book and really liked it. It is a work of historical fiction to a certain extent, as long as you don't need that historical fiction, that history part, to be realistic. Essentially, it's set in one place, this piece of land in the Northwoods, which I believe is in western Massachusetts. And we see various groups of people come and go, live on this piece of land, develop this piece of land, build a house on this piece of land, go through their own personal struggles on this piece of land. And we see all kinds of characters involved. It starts off kind of like the Vaster Wilds, with a young Puritan couple escaping from society because they're punished for something, and essentially moving out all on their own into the wilderness and building a cabin and starting off this whole story, which is pretty impossible in the time period they're talking about, that just one man and one woman can move out into the wilderness with no other support and live. That is incredibly unlikely in the early colonial period in which they're talking about. So, you know, as a historian, that kind of bothered me. Then we see other people come and take over this piece of land, one of whom decides to plant an apple orchard. He finds the perfect kind of apples he wants to grow. I believe he's an old British military officer, and from that point, for a long time, the book becomes kind of obsessed with apples. And you learn a whole lot about apples, which I don't care to learn, and I didn't memorize any of it. I don't remember any of it. It didn't have an impact on me. There are cool scenes, and so what we get then from that point on is one vignette after another taking place on this land, at this house, with all kinds of characters. And so, you know, part of the problem I had with the book is it seemed like something I'd seen before. Jenny Erpenbeck wrote a book similar to this called Visitation, in which we see people come and go from one piece of property and one house and all the things that take place there. So the idea was something I'd seen done, and I think Erpenbeck did it better in far fewer pages. In addition to that, it kind of felt a little bit like Cloud Atlas without the kind of, well, I guess apples might be the unifying theme going through it. It felt kind of like Cloud Atlas in its kind of varied writing style and all the different kinds of characters, and sometimes I believe worms or something like that, who we learn the story of in this one place. And so it just felt like something had been done before. And then probably the biggest thing that bothered me the most is I thought I was reading a book which intended to be realistic, and all of a sudden, boom, paranormal stuff starts to happen. in the kind of the middle of the book, and that really kind of threw me off and made me feel like, that the book was taking the easy way out. And like I said, it was already something I'd seen before and thought it had been done better, and so it was pretty disappointing. I really had looked forward to reading it, only to be really disappointed. And then the number one book on my list, the most disappointing book, and a book I really disliked, was The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. Again, this is a book that I had to read for the BookTube prize, and I ranked it number 6. I think I must have been the only one who didn't like it in that group, and overall on BookTube. I just thought it was one of those books where we have a writer who has an idea about what he wants to write and how he wants to write a book. And then he kind of creates the plot and the characters to fit those different parts. So the different parts of the book, basically there are 4 parts of the book, I think. Each one follows one of 4 characters, all of whom are related. There's a young man who is the son of a car dealer in a small town in Ireland. And he is being bullied and picked on, and he has a problem. His sister is an overprivileged, kind of bratty daughter who is miserable because she's in love with her best friend. There is the mother, who is the aging beauty of this community, who had fallen in love with the local football star, handsome man, and he had died, and so she married his brother. That's her husband and the father of these 2 kids. And then there's a husband who's a closeted gay man who's basically his business that he's inherited from his father is failing, and he is being blackmailed. And it all kind of comes to a conclusion in this part of the woods in which the dad and somebody who worked for him, who is a prepper or a doomsday prepper, have set up a bunker, and a tragedy occurs, and you're supposed to care about who was the victim of this tragedy. And to be honest with you, I didn't. The book is overwritten. The characters are stock characters. Aging beauty, closeted gay man, young man in trouble, bratty teenager in love and disappointed because of that. All those characters felt stock, and the sections were oftentimes too long. The section about the mother, which is written kind of in a stream of consciousness style, is way, way too long and not nearly clear enough. The father seems to be the kind of character you can find in any number of books. He is relatively hapless and increasingly hapless, and I didn't have a lot of sympathy for what was going on with him. The best character in the book is the little boy character who, goes off to have an adventure on his own, and almost ends kind of tragically till his sister kind of miraculously rescues him. Hoping I'm giving too much away there, but it just seemed like that Murray wanted to write this story about this place and these characters, or maybe just write a book in this way. And the idea was better than the execution. And to execute the idea, he falls back on a lot of kind of stock characters and tropes. And every time it felt like to me, you could feel when Murray felt like the story was lagging, that he needed something. Every time those happened, he would introduce something like this story of danger that the young boy's in, or will the aging beauty cheat on her husband or not? The blackmail story. There's a scene in which 2 people are seen having sex for very little reason other than to create a point of interest in the book. And I just thought the whole thing was overblown, overdone, incredibly disappointing, and that's why it's the number one book on my list of most disappointing books of 2024. Anyway, there you go. I look forward to your comments and criticisms in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.